Welcome to How to Disaster. My name is Jennifer Gray Thompson, and I'm so glad you're here with us today. I'm really pleased and excited to bring you Joel Pollak. Joel Pollak is a Palisades Fire survivor with a smoke-damaged home. He's a family man, and he's also the editor of the California Post, which is a relatively new endeavor from the same people who bring you the New York Post. Previous to that, Joel worked for Breitbart News, and he is definitely a deeply political person. And one of the things we talk about in this podcast is how you can be so politically divided on certain things, and yet we can come together in really beautiful ways when it comes to the issue of disaster. You know, disaster is not a place where politics belongs, but it is a place where we often find ourselves. And it's important that we always hold on to the river of humanity that runs through us, especially when we're experiencing these really terrible moments in our lives. I met Joel about 3 weeks into the fire, and, you know, we didn't start off that great, which he'll talk about, but we really got to the point where we have a very warm and caring relationship, and I always love to hear from him, to see how he's doing on getting home in his smoke-damaged home. And I think that one of the things that's been good for both of us is no matter what you think divides you, if we take the time to listen to each other, and if we share our human experiences, then a lot of the other parts of politics actually fades away, and we become instead humans just trying to walk each other home. And so I think you'll really enjoy this podcast. It's very, very much a fire story about what happened with Joel and his family, things that really helped them in the area of insurance, ways that they were frustrated through the process of insurance, especially having a smoke damaged home. And I think you'll enjoy getting to know him as a fire survivor, a journalist, and that's really important in this story, is how he approached from that point of view, but really as a father, a husband, a fire survivor, a community member in a community that he deeply cherishes, the Palisades, and really their story, how they've been navigating along. And then in the end, some advice that he would give to other fire survivors. Thank you so much for being here with us, and I hope you enjoy How to Disaster. Welcome, Joel Pollak. I am so happy to have you on this podcast. We are relaunching after a few years, and you were one of the first people that I knew I wanted to record with. Let's talk about how we met. Why did we meet, and where did we meet? Do you remember?
We met in Santa Monica. It must have been a couple weeks after the fire. I was running around everywhere, and you were at the offices of Snap at a corporate campus in the eastern part of Santa Monica, where there are a lot of tech companies. And our state senator, Ben Allen, who I had gone to college with, was there. And I was hoping to catch up with him. I can't remember exactly why. Obviously something fire related. And then you were there, and somehow we got into some political topic. And I think I said something stupid, and you replied in a very snappy way. And then we really didn't get off to a very good start. But we exchanged contact information.
We did.
And you were very helpful, and you were willing to look past my bizarre political perspective. And we got along very well. And I had started a podcast with a couple of neighbors of mine called Three Homeless Guys. We've been doing it now for more than a year. And we had you on as one of our early guests. And you've had a lot of experience with fires and disaster recovery. And it was a very successful show. And you put me in touch with Joy Chen, who had been through the Eaton fire over on the east side of LA. And she had started the Eaton Fire Survivors Network to deal with problems with insurance claims. And we were also at that stage really having severe problems with our insurance claims. And so we had her on the podcast. And because she came on the podcast, again, because you connected us, there were many people in Pacific Palisades who were able to join the Eaton Fire Survivors Network. So the two fire communities were actually connected through Joy Chen. And not only did that amplify what Joy was trying to do and has succeeded, I think, in doing, in putting pressure on insurance companies and legislators and public officials, but it also created social connections between the communities. And that was really important. It might not have happened because the two fires, although they started on the same day, started in different ways, started for different reasons. The communities are somewhat different. And so that connection became very, very powerful. And so we stayed in touch, and we've teased each other over the last several months about politics and about Trump and about the Democrats and one thing and another. But I think what I've really learned from working with you and getting to know you and just chatting to you is a community really needs people to work on disaster problems from every perspective. You're going to need Democrats, you're going to need Republicans, you're going to need conservatives and liberals, and you're going to need people who have connections to different people in different places and sometimes unlikely places who might be willing to help you, because that's the only way you're going to create a consensus that something needs to be done. And it's been a really incredible experience. I feel like my neighbors and I threw away our political identities, at least as it came to local issues. People are still very opinionated about big national and international issues. But I think that we've also learned that having those particular identities can be helpful. And I'm one of the few open Republicans in my neighborhood, and no one really had a use for me before. But now everyone has a use for me because there's a Republican administration. So it's been interesting. And I've also been very open to working with Democrats who have been doing the right thing. And I feel much better about us as Americans, I think, because I see in the ways in which we're all solving problems together rather than creating new problems by fighting with each other. So I think it's been a real education for me to get to know you. It's a very long-winded answer, but it's been a very productive relationship.
I think so too. I think it's actually sort of like a great start to this entire conversation because, disaster does not care when it's taking you out who you voted for, didn't vote, how much money you make, don't make, none of that stuff matters. But of course, on the recovery side, it can matter, even though there's a lot of people most people believe that politics has no place in disaster. We obviously have to work across the aisle. It has to be bipartisan in order to get good legislation across the board that's going to help everyone and solve real problems on the ground. And you all in LA had some new puzzles for us. And I've been doing this 8.5 years, and still, this is still a whole new atmosphere to do it under, including under, this particular administration, which, is interesting. And, but also, having these dual disasters we call them sisters, not twins, that are an hour apart from each other and hold some things very much in common. And some things are not going to be exactly the same, but I have enjoyed hearing your perspective. I also think it's a testament to, it doesn't really matter on which side that you vote. If you can talk together as Americans, like we can actually solve real problems. And really at the end of the day, we're trying to reduce suffering. And I think that that's something that you and I hold in common. And I think one of my favorite calls that I got all year from anybody was from you after you visited Coffee Park and spent the day with Jeff Okrepke. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that was incredible. So I was in the Bay Area and I wanted to go see Coffee Park in Santa Rosa because some members of our neighborhood had gone there to see their rebuilding process. And I thought it would be useful for me to see. And I tried reaching out to various people who lived there. And interestingly enough, my friend, the cartoonist, Scott Adams, who drew the Dilbert cartoon, he passed away in January. But before he passed away, he put me in touch with a lot of his friends in the area. I'm actually writing his biography. And one of them actually lived in Santa Rosa. And he's also a pretty famous cartoonist named Stephen Pastis. And Stephen was connected to a graphic novelist who lost his home in the Tubbs fire. So we had this incredible conversation on my way up there about their experience of the fire. And so I got there and I was standing in Coffee Park, and it was the most incredible experience for me because it felt as if nothing had ever happened. Obviously, I didn't see the community beforehand, and I had been told that the trees look different. There aren't too many large trees anymore because the trees that were replanted are young, and a lot of the homes look similar to each other, although I didn't really notice that. But what I loved most of all about standing there on a beautiful winter afternoon was I could hear dogs barking and children playing in the playground. And to me, those were the sounds of a community that had come back. And it was like watching the fulfillment of a dream, because the thing that matters most to me about Pacific Palisades is the life that my children had. We had a small town atmosphere in the middle of LA where kids could simply walk outside and find each other, ride bicycles, play baseball, play football, walk over to each other's homes. Parents left their doors open until well after dinner time. We didn't care that much about where our kids were. We knew they were somewhere safe. And that's the life that my kids have unfortunately lost, because we relocated. First, we bounced around LA for a while. Then my wife got a job in DC. So we're actually in the DC area. I go back and forth between DC and LA. But DC is very different. Obviously, the weather is much colder in the winter, much more hot and humid in the summer. It makes it hard for kids even to interact outside. But we lost that. And I saw it again in Coffey Park, and it was just incredible. And I talked to Jeff, and I talked about the struggles we were having, and he told me some of the lessons that they had learned. And it was really inspiring to see a community that had gone through this and had come out the other side. Not that everything was perfect, and there were some homes up on the hill and communities further up that did not succeed in rebuilding to the same extent. Ironically, sometimes those were wealthier areas. They just happened to live on hillsides where it was much more difficult to do construction. But it was just really fantastic to be in a community that was alive. And I think that's what all of us want for Pacific Palisades, because it really was a small town in the middle of LA.
And, the interesting thing about Coffey Park, and for those of you unfamiliar, it was 1,400 home planned urban development. This is, 4 hours into the first night of the Tubbs Fire, which is one of a dozen fires that comprised the North Bay Complex fires on October 8th, 2017. That was a bedroom community. Like, a lot of those people didn't even know each other before the fires. And what the fires did is that it united them. And I have photos, I can send them to you. It looks like a bomb went off. Like, everything was just incinerated. It was cars. The colors were brown and orange and gray. And the lots are fairly small. They're about 4,000 square feet, kind of like in the Alphabets in Palisades. And what they did from that is they actually created a community by leaning all the way into community cohesion. And so to see Coffey Park come back like that, and know that the Palisades actually had a much, much tighter social cohesion prior to the fires, which is serving you. You're actually moving at a very fast clip getting home. I know it doesn't feel that way for the people experiencing it, but it's much faster than anything we've ever seen before. And I'm so glad you met with Jeff. We've been working together for years. He was a renter who then was able to convert into a homeowner. They had renter's insurance. I hope everybody has renter's insurance. And most of Coffey Park was rebuilt in about 3.5, 4 years. And so that really bucks the trend of what people think is going to happen when they come to you and they say it's a 10 to 20 year recovery in the Palisades and Altadena. We just patently disagree with that. We could talk about that. I don't know if you've read the McKinsey report. It's, in my view, not actually accurate for what's going to happen. But one of the things that I loved is that when you called me on the way home, you're like, oh, I feel this thing called hope. And that means everything in our work, because we call ourselves hope dealers, because we actually can give realistic hope, not like toxic positivity, if you will, not like that, but like this is how it really works and how it can really happen. So I loved hearing that for you. And you also have a really, you have the LA fires have brought up or really magnified this other problem that we've seen in some communities, but not even close to the extent that happened in your community, which is the problem of standing homes and smoke damage. Can you talk about that experience?
Well, I'll talk about it as a miracle of standing homes, because when I saw my house was still standing, it was like a miracle to me. But roughly 25% of the homes in Pacific Palisades survived the fire. in different neighborhoods, there were different proportions. There are some neighborhoods where 85, 90% of the homes survived. There are other neighborhoods where maybe 5% of the homes survived. In my neighborhood, which is Marquez Knolls, which is a mixed neighborhood. By that I mean we have some very wealthy homeowners. We also have some middle or working class homeowners. We're right uphill from the Palisades Bowl, which is the mobile home park. And on our street, there were retirees who had lived there since the 50s or 60s. And there were a couple of celebrities as well. And the funny thing is, there was a quite famous comedian living on my street, and I didn't even know until it came out during the fire that he was there. He had kept a very low profile. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of community it was. If you're a Hollywood celebrity and you want to live a normal life rather than living behind gates and fences and guards, you would choose to live in Pacific Palisades because it's so idyllic, but also so down to earth. And anyway, our area is right by one of the major elementary schools. It's just uphill from the Lake Shrine, if you know that part of LA, which has been there for 100 years, which survived the fire, by the way, because they had their own source of water. They had the lake in the middle of their garden, and they had a barge on the lake that they had a pump on. And so the barge was able to pump water out of the lake to hoses on the perimeter. The only thing they lost was the public bathroom, which is an exterior or external building right by the parking lot. That's the only thing that burnt down. Mm-hmm. But what happened was the forecast came in for these high winds, and we've had high winds before, and Marquez Knolls is perched on flatlands that are on top of a ridge that runs next to the Palisades Canyon. If you know Palisades Drive, which goes to the Highlands, then you know Palisades Canyon. It was also on the news because that's where the major traffic jam was, where all the cars were abandoned and people had to run for their lives, and they had to bring bulldozers in to move the cars out of the way to get the fire equipment up the hill. But the important part of that, for this part of the story, is that it was immediately downwind from the origin of the fire. So we had Santa Ana winds come through almost every winter. Sometimes they could get up to 30 or 40 miles an hour. So we were used to them. And when we had a forecast of even higher winds, I took down our flagpole because it had snapped once before in Santa Ana winds. And I took down my son's pitching net for baseball. Anything that could be blown away, I took down. So we were preparing for it. And then I dropped my kids off at school. I took my 3-year-old, who's now 4, to daycare in Santa Monica. I went to the gym, and then I went to Starbucks to start checking my email and getting back to work. And I got a text message from our nanny, who was walking with our youngest of 4. And she said, "I see smoke and I smell smoke." And I hadn't had any kind of alert on my phone or anything like that. So I tried looking on social media, and I saw 1 or 2 little posts that said, "Hey, there's a fire at the top of the Highlands." So I knew, and this is where the journalism comes in, I knew from covering fires that if you can see it and you can smell it, you're probably pretty close to it. And so I sent a text message to her and to my wife and said, "We need to pack. We probably have to leave very soon. The fire," again, I didn't think it was going to consume the entire town, but there's probably a fire nearby. And the other reason I knew about risk was the year we bought our home, 2019, there had been a fire deep in the mountains, but also upwind of our neighborhood. And our street was just within the evacuation warning zone. There weren't mandatory evacuations, but there were these warnings that you might have to evacuate. This was the end of 2019. That fire was caused by arson. There were some homeless people who were in the hills, and they had deliberately set the forest on fire, mentally ill people. And we couldn't close on our house because we couldn't get fire insurance during the emergency. So we knew that this was a potential issue, and we were aware of the fire risk. And partly as a result, we were prepared for this kind of thing happening. Also, our house and several on the street next to us are up against a lot that's owned by the LA Department of Water and Power. And during COVID, when nobody was coming to work, they let their grass grow really, really high. And so we called them and we said, "Can you please cut your grass? It's a fire hazard." And they did. They came and they cut the grass, and they started doing it more regularly. And that, I think, ultimately was a huge help to us, as I'll explain in a minute. But I knew the fire was going to come in our direction. And then as I drove from Santa Monica north back to Pacific Palisades, I saw this horizontal column of smoke, and my heart just sank because At that point, I thought, oh goodness, we're going to have to evacuate for 2 or 3 days. That's what I thought was going to happen. This is in the hills. I'm thinking it's somewhere out, in the state park area, but I couldn't imagine yet that it was going to actually come through the community. But I thought, we've had to deal with this evacuation situation before. We have to pack up some suitcases and find a place to stay. So we started packing and we got through it pretty quickly. The only part that took a long time was getting my son out of school. So we live next door to Marquez Elementary School, and the principal, who was a wonderful woman, she's not the principal there anymore, but she was absent that day for family reasons, and the staff were struggling to deal with the situation because there had been no evacuation called, and yet the school, like the homes, is situated on top of this ridge, and the smoke started getting thicker and thicker, and parents started coming in and saying, we need to get our kids out of school, and they didn't have the authority simply to dismiss school or to organize an evacuation, so they were making the parents fill out the regular form for a regular day when you pull your kid out. And parents started panicking and crying and looking out the windows. You start to see the smoke. Very unpleasant. We packed up and we left, again, before any kind of formal evacuation order. And I took a couple of videos from our house as we left. And you can see the smoke just drifting over toward my house. The wind is blowing directly toward us. And what I didn't know at the time, but found out later, was the fire swept through the canyon in about 90 minutes from the origin of the fire at the top of the mountain all the way to the ocean. And it just scorched all the vegetation in the canyon. It did not actually burn too many structures until the next day. But what we were seeing was the vegetation on fire.
Is that when it blew back again?
Yeah, it basically took a while to get into the homes in our neighborhood. And yes, there were some wind shifts that caused it to come back up the hill. But it basically went like a blowtorch through the canyon. And there was a lot of fuel there. We had very wet winters, which normally makes it harder to burn things, but because there was so much brush that had grown back, there was a lot of fuel. So we left, and in our synagogue, we had just read the story of Joseph and Pharaoh the week before. And Pharaoh at one stage says to Joseph, tell your father to come to Egypt and tell him not to worry about his possessions. Just don't worry about your things. And that was very much on my mind. I thought, well, I'm not going to worry about my things. We got the people out. We got the important documents out. I thought at that time we had about a 40% chance of losing the house because of where the fire was. And we left, and I said to my wife, I'm not worried because this is why we have fire insurance. And in fact, we were very lucky because the year before, in 2024, our insurance agent was retiring. And she said to my wife, you might consider getting more insurance because the industry is changing. And my wife, who is an economist, looked at the costs and discovered that the costs of rebuilding, if we did lose our home for whatever reason, were much higher than they had been when we first took out our insurance. So we actually went into the fire with more insurance than we had before and more than a lot of other people. So we left we left Palisades. We were actually driving toward the center of Palisades at first because I thought, given the wind direction, there's no way that the center of Palisades is going to be at risk. Palisades is pretty spread out. So we were on the northwestern edge, and I thought, well, the center will be fine. So we were going to stay with a friend there. But then we got stuck in that traffic on Sunset, and I called my wife. We went in several cars. I called my wife and said, we have to get down to PCH. We cannot go to the center of Palisades. So we took a side street through a private driveway that we knew about, and a lot of other people started following us. I don't think we were the first, but we were like the second or third car. And we made it down to PCH, and I called my friend in the center of Palisades, and I said, we're just going to go to Santa Monica. We're not going to come to Palisades, not going to come to downtown or the village. It turned out he ended up losing his house. So the house we were supposed to evacuate to burned when the rest of the center of Palisades burned later that night. But we made it to Santa Monica, and we collected the kids who had heard little rumors. So we have 4 kids. So one kid had come from the school next to our house. They obviously knew there was a fire.
Can you give the ages? Sorry
sure,
to interrupt you. Give the ages for people who are out there, because I have a follow-up question about that.
At that time, our eldest was 13. Then my son, who saw the fire from Marquez Elementary, was 9. And we had our 3-year-old in Santa Monica at daycare, and then our 3-month-old baby with the nanny. And we all went to Santa Monica, and we actually stayed with another friend, with our former rabbi. We had lived in Santa Monica for 8 years, and so we stayed with him. And I was watching the news, and you could see the flames on the hillside, and I started to realize this was going to be very, very bad. And all night, I watched the CAL FIRE website to see where the fire was. I got a few hours of sleep, and I got up again. with smoke everywhere and the sun rising in this horrible pall of smoke. And I, again, assumed that our house was probably lost, but on the CAL FIRE map, the perimeter of the fire stopped just short of our house. And I couldn't figure out whether our house was burning or not. Eventually, at about 10 in the morning, I called my friend Alex Michelson, who at that time was a journalist with the local Fox affiliate. Now he's at CNN. And Alex is one of the most fair people in journalism. It's not often that you even get a platform if you're on the conservative side in a liberal city like LA, but he was always very good about giving a fair chance to people on both sides. And I was on his first ever politics show, which at that time was called The Issue Is. I was on with Adam Schiff and Gavin Newsom. So he brought together an eclectic group of people. And I called him and I said...
Strange bedfellows.
Yeah, exactly. That was the first time I met Gavin Newsom. Anyway, I said to Alex, do you think I can get into the fire zone with a press pass? And he said, yes. So I didn't know what I should take with me. I had no respirator or any kind of fancy equipment. I just went into my sweatsuit and I had some K95 masks or whatever from COVID. And I went in and it was pretty scary at first driving up PCH because there was this giant wall of smoke and I wasn't sure I could even get back in safely. And then I saw cars coming out. I thought, well, if cars are coming out, I can probably get in. I went in. I was seeing all kinds of destruction everywhere. It was horrible, apocalyptic. And I couldn't even drive all the way up my street because of downed power lines that were on fire. There were these electrical fires. It looked really dangerous. And I walked up my street and there were homes burning around me. And there on the corner was my house still intact. And I'm getting emotional as I tell you this because it was just so surreal, but everything around was burning. And there was smoke surrounding my house. This gets to the point about standing homes, what standing homes have to deal with. But there was smoke surrounding my house. I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. So I went to the windward side of my house and I realized there were wooden supports in the LADWP property, that is the power company's property, that were burning. I didn't even know they were there before, but probably they had caught fire from some embers. They had probably been there as part of some retaining wall 50 years before, but they were burning. My fence was also on fire on that side and on another side of the house. And I thought, okay, how do I save my house? I mean, I don't know that I can, and maybe it'll be okay on its own, but I wasn't sure. And I thought I have to at least try. So I got a few things out of the house first. I had my key, I opened it up. And I got my journals out of the house, which was important to me if I could get back in. And then I tried turning on the water. There was no running water anywhere, indoors or outdoors. I thought, where do I have a source of water? Well, I had given my wife flowers every week. I still try to give her flowers every Friday. And I had water in the vases. So I took the vases and I went outside and I threw the water on the fire. And then I realized there was water flowing down the gutter from the burned out homes uphill, which had water flowing from their pipes now exposed. And I started filling up the vases and going back and forth. Then I remembered my son, who's an avid baseball player, as I alluded to before. He had these buckets of baseballs in the backyard. So I went to the backyard and I emptied the baseballs out of the bucket, took the bucket, started filling them up. These two guys drove by in a pickup truck. They had respirators. They were fully equipped and they might've been volunteer firemen. I don't know. They said they were handymen. I still don't know who they were, but they jumped out and they helped me. And the three of us formed a chain, basically filling up buckets and taking these buckets to put out the fire on the fence. We put out fires on my neighbor's property, on the fence there, on his trees, which had started to catch fire while we were there. And then there was this big noise and a massive pall of smoke. And what I found out later was that the auditorium at the school, which hadn't yet burned, it had started burning maybe just before I got there. The auditorium essentially exploded. And the two guys I was with said, we got to get out of here. It's too dangerous to be here. So we drove away. But I spent the rest of the day driving through Pacific Palisades. Most of it had already burned. And I took friends to try to find their house, which had burned maybe 5 or 6 hours before, completely destroyed. But my house ended up surviving. And the issue was that we had some damage to the exterior of the house. It didn't burn. Most of the damage was the wall that was facing the fence that burned. That wall was scorched by the fire, and we think that it probably also expanded during the fire and then contracted, so it created cracks in the wall. You can see as you look at the wall of the house that it doesn't look right. We later learned that the flooring upstairs had also buckled in the heat. So being so close to the fire had caused these other kinds of damage, but the main source of damage was smoke damage. The house smelled terrible for months, and you could actually see residue from smoke around all of the light fixtures. Anywhere there was any kind of a gap, the smoke just came into the house. My wife, again, being very brilliant, had sealed the windows before we left, so it could have been worse, and actually embers could have gotten into the house. One of the other, so why did our house survive? I mean, part of it was luck. Part of it was the power company cutting the grass, as I mentioned before, because that grass would have been fuel for the fire. Part of it was just good windows that we had. We had these double pane glass windows. The front pane shattered, but the second pane didn't from the heat. So had they both shattered, hot air could have gotten into the house. And also, we had this row of trees that shielded the house. But I want to just mention one thing, and I always, especially in the early days, I really told people this and emphasized it. When I got to my house, one of the other things I saw, even though the hose wasn't working, the hose was stretched all the way across my lawn, which it hadn't been the day before. We had a gardener come every Monday, and they would always leave the gardening service would always leave the hose neatly coiled in the front of the house. And by the Wednesday, when I came back in and the fire was still going, it was all stretched all the way across my lawn. And it was clear to me that some neighbor had tried to fight the fire on my fence on my behalf. And I still don't know who it was. And to me, that was the story of Pacific Palisades, that everybody helped everybody if they could. And it was very humbling because even though it is somewhat of a mixed community, it is a very affluent community. The median income's $200,000. A lot of people in my neighborhood would go to charity events. They would give money. I know 2 neighbors who lost their home who were always going to charitable events, looking very beautiful and made up and everything in their fancy car and beautiful dresses and tuxedos. And now people were recipients of charity. Now people were literally accepting cash grants, or in my case, I couldn't use my winter coat. So I picked up a donated coat and I still have it. It's been fantastic in the East Coast winter. And it was very humbling. And we've had to deal with unique problems in insurance as well. So my wife joked later that it might have been better if I'd let the house burn, because she imagined it was simpler to get the insurance to pay out if you had actually lost everything. Turns out it's not so simple even then. But I think psychologically it's better to have a standing home because...
Well, I think that the perception, especially before your fire, was that if your home didn't burn, then it was somehow intact, and then just coming in and wiping everything down would work. And that can be true, but it really depends on what year it was built, and what type of windows it has. It has so many elements predicated upon whether or not that's true. But in your fires, in both Eaton and Palisades, it's what we call urban conflagration, a very hard word to say, but it means that not only is smoke infiltrating your house, but it has far more chemicals in it, because literally everything that was inside of somebody's home, from garage to under your kitchen sink, for everything that builds your home, becomes part of the smoke that then infiltrates your home. And most people also don't realize that a home easily burns from the outside in most of the time. So you didn't have any ember inclusion, which is great. So I'm so happy for you for that. I love that your windows were double pane. That's a very big deal. But I just think that there was a lack of understanding. We knew a little bit before your fires, but why it is that so many of them survived. The other thing I would like to say is when people started calling me within 12 hours of your fire, it was mostly on the Palisades side. One of the things I heard over and over again was that people who were so used to giving were not used to receiving. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because for many it was a surreal experience.
I'm Sohaila, and I lived in the Marquez Mills area of the Palisades.
That was, I think, near where the fire started, right?
Unfortunately, yes.
Were you home the day of the fire?
I was.
What was your story of escape?
Well, I didn't know what was happening because I had just gotten back to town from up north. So I was kind of clueless about the weather predictions and all of that. But that morning, my daughter called from Santa Monica and said, "Mom, have you seen the fires?" And I thought, "What fires are you talking about?" I looked out my window and I could see the flames behind the little hill on the other side of the street. And next thing you know, my other neighbor, God bless her, called me and said, "If you don't get out now, you're gonna be stuck." So we just picked up and left, thinking it's another fire drill.
Like it always is. Was.
Yep, and that was it.
So tell me, where did you go? Where did you escape to?
So it took us like almost 5 hours to get to West LA because we didn't know where we were going.
Of course.
So we got into the West LA area. I remember we went to Whole Foods, got some food. And then I went to a friend's house in Brentwood area just to sort of park myself until I find out what's going on. I had no clue what was about to happen. And then we ended up at another friend's house, which was vacant for that evening. And then the next day is when I saw a video of my house, of my street, and I knew that the house is gone.
Your house was gone.
Yeah.
Were you able to take anything before you left?
Nope.
Nothing, no jewelry, no painting?
No.
Okay, I'm crying for you. So what have you been surprised at in yourself when it comes to resilience?
That's a wonderful question. That's a beautiful question, because I have learned that this wasn't my first disaster, if you will, but I've learned that you learn the essence of life is not about things. It's you just cherish every day even more. You cherish people around you more. You recognize the fragility of life, and that at the end of the day, and it sounds so cliche, at the end of the day, it's the love and affection of your friends and family that matter. Everything else, I had a beautiful architecturally built house. We built it ourselves. The hard way. Nothing came easy, but my brother is an architect, so that house meant so much to me. The paintings were my family's paintings that they had drawn for me. But you know what? I say it was just a house.
Well, let me ask you, I hear an accent. My husband was born in Cuba. They had to escape for their lives. Did you come from another country to America?
I did, yeah. I'm Iranian.
Oh, my goodness.
So we all, and when I say we all, a lot of us came here right around the revolution, before or after. So, I've been in this country almost 46, 7, 8 years. And this is home. It has always been home. But Palisades is home.
Palisades
is home. I'm just, walking with my friend here. And we're talking about how prejudiced I am. I go to Beverly Hills and I don't like it.
I know.
No place in LA is Palisades.
No place. And also, no one knew that this was the preferred place for everyone in LA. I mean, you could live in so many neighborhoods, but really and truly, when you made it here, it was nirvana, because nature
it is nirvana.
And beauty.
The air, the weather, the water, the people. It was always a hidden gem. Not too many people knew about the Palisades. I was fortunate when we discovered this part of LA. So yeah, it's been very tough. But at the end of the day, life's not about your house or your stuff. Life is about really, really cherishing every moment, because these are the wake-up calls. These are the it could be, God forbid, it could be the earthquake the next time.
Yeah.
And I may not even survive it. So why am I even worried about, the house? And
we also, are alive, right?
Oh, yes.
And our families are alive.
Thank God, yeah.
But let me just, final question. What's your hope for the Palisades for the future? What's your hope for the city?
Personally, I really hope that the city will come back, and not in the next 7 to 10 years, but a lot sooner. I'm not young anymore, so my horizon is not that of a 30-year-old. So I want this to happen sooner. I want to come back. I want to rebuild. I want the schools to go up again. I want the churches and places of worship to become what they used to be. But most importantly, I sincerely hope that all the residents come back. I hope this doesn't become another, development for out-of-towners to grab, a piece of land. So that's my hope.
Well, let me tell you, today's a good sign, isn't it?
Today is a beautiful sign. And I had this on my calendar today, and then I got busy with life. I was bringing my friend to show her, the disaster. And what do I see? The table. I'm like, oh my God, I was meant to be here today.
The longest table. Well, it's a lovely, lovely pleasure to meet you.
Thank you. It's great
the good work
to meet you. Thank you for the work you're doing. This one day, everybody listens to this, and they're like, "What? Do you remember the fire?" Yeah.
So go forth and tell us about having a smoke damaged home. Very difficult.
So
insurance companies were not kind.
Right. So I'll try to summarize our insurance story. But again, on paper, we had a fantastic policy. And I have a friend who works in health insurance, and he said, you have to get a public adjuster to help you. Now, I know some people do it on their own, but public adjusters are basically almost like lawyers for your insurance claim. There are people who are certified who know the California laws or whatever state they work in, they're licensed to work in. They know the codes, and they help you put together your claim, and they negotiate with the insurance company on your behalf. And ours has been fantastic, actually. But the insurance company has their own adjusters, and they sent someone who was very kind, but completely in over his head. He had never done anything like this before, and he didn't really understand how to estimate our damage. They then replaced him with another adjuster, and this is very common to have this cycle of adjusters. Another adjuster who tried to do everything from his computer and never wanted to visit the house. And I kept inviting him to visit the house and kept declining. And he essentially said to us, here's $5,000 for the contents of your house, which we estimated was about 1% of the cost that we had suffered. And he emphasized that what the insurance company wanted was for us to clean the house before they decided whether there was anything actually damaged. And he said, basically, you can clean anything. You can clean a bed, you can clean your clothes, you can clean your couch. And we had actually tried this a little bit. I took a few clothes from the house when I was able to get in, and I washed them, and I was okay with my sweats that I salvaged from the house, but my wife put on a dress that I had brought for her, and she broke out in a rash, and she said, I'm never wearing anything from that house again. It's just not happening.
Yep.
And we tried explaining to the insurance company that that's not really going to fly. And we had learned that anything upholstered was basically going to be uncleanable. You could clean the dining room table, but you couldn't clean the dining room chairs, which had upholstery on them. So we were hugely frustrated because they essentially offered us nothing, the equivalent of a bucket and a mop. And then they cycled us through another adjuster and another adjuster and another adjuster. And that's when we came across Joy Chen, and Joy said, yes, this is a common experience. And I do think that the Eaton Fire Survivors Network really giving some coherence to this shared experience helped us, because right around the time she got involved, we finally landed on an adjuster who was willing to work with us and started giving us the first real payments for the contents of our house, which was incredibly important. Fast forward to September last year, August, September of 2025. So now about 7 or 8 months after the fire. And we're still not really getting anywhere on repairs. So we've had a few payments for contents, but nowhere on repairs. And the insurance company then issued a kind of veiled threat, as if it were our fault that we weren't able to go ahead yet, and said, we're going to trigger this 35-day warning they have to give you before your alternate living expenses basically are denied and you have to move back into your home. And at that point, I said, okay, I'm trying to fight to save my house. I want to go back to my house, but I had to put my house on the market because I was not going to be able to afford to pay my mortgage, which we're still paying, and to pay rent in the new place we were living if our insurance company cut us off. And that was upsetting to some neighbors who were aware that I was involved in the community and trying to help the rebuilding process. And here I was putting my house on the market, which obviously you can do, and people sell their lots and they sell their homes, and that's totally fine. But it was hard emotionally, but I just said, look, I have no option. I don't have another financial backstop here. We switched adjusters again, or I should say the insurance company did, and that threat was withdrawn, and I took the house off the market. And the stage we're at now is we have managed to remediate the entire interior of the house. Now, to mention the chemicals that you alluded to earlier, we did testing, which we were able to convince the insurance company to pay for. Not everyone has been so lucky. We found lead and zinc and bismuth inside the house among the 17 heavy metals that you're supposed to test for. And the most concerning one was lead. Obviously, we're all familiar with the problem of lead poisoning, but there are others. There was no asbestos, which is another common problem. So we had the house remediated, and that part is done. The remediation company said, well, we're going to test the soil as well. They tested the soil. There was lead, arsenic, and bismuth in the soil as well, plus, lead, zinc, and bismuth plus arsenic in the soil. And initially we thought maybe we'll have to take 3 inches of soil off. Well, it turned out to be 6 inches because the contamination was so bad. And the other problem is California doesn't have any landfills that will take that soil because it's now hazardous waste. So we had to truck it to Arizona. The cost went ballooning very high. And the stage I'm at now is I'm trying to figure out how to pay for that, even while moving ahead with the rest of my repairs. So we have an adjuster that we're working with. My public adjuster is working with the insurance company's adjuster, and that seems to be going fairly well, although everything takes a long time. I'm hopeful that we will start the next phase of repair, which basically amounts to removing that back wall that was damaged and replacing some other things, and eventually repainting the house, replacing the soil, replanting some trees that burned, replanting some shrubs that had to be removed, and finally getting back to where we were. Optimistically, it could take maybe 4 or 5 more months.
Okay.
Realistically, I have this financial hill I have to get up to find the additional money to pay for the soil disposal. And I'm sorry I've been so long-winded because I know we don't have that much time left, but that's basically
That's okay. Well, there is a program that I asked, somebody had mentioned a program when I was talking to them the other day when we were in LA that does replace soil. So I was curious about that. It's usually for houses that are totally burned, but I don't know why that couldn't be applied here too. And so that's one of the questions. I think I texted you right away to say, because we had just had a conversation about this. So I'm going to see if that can exist as it should exist. And that seems like a very reasonable remediation. And I don't think that you should have to take on extra debt. I want to go back for a minute too, because it is how to disaster. So a couple of things. Unfortunately, you all have had to really take the helm even on how to navigate smoke damage. For those of you who don't know, the California Fair Plan initially said, oh, that's not us. We don't do that, even though it's the insurance of last resort, and they absolutely should be doing that. So they were taken to court, and then they had to actually cover smoke damage. The other thing is that, ALE or a loss of use or whatever, there's different acronyms for it, but those are the two main ones, or LOS and ALE, that gives you, money so that you can continue to live or you can rent other places. Did they extend that for you then for another 6 months or until the end? Because we saw caps on it in LA that we had not seen previously. It was only 1 year for our fires. Our fire survivors got it extended to 2 years. That didn't really benefit them though. So did they extend that for you?
We haven't had an extension because the policy that my wife upgraded to actually has a 2-year time limit. 2 years or the maximum amount, whichever you hit first. The irritating thing about it is they only pay out 2 months at a time. So it's been frustrating to try to deal with leasing arrangements because landlords want more than 2 months of rent. It's also, you can't get a security deposit out of the policy to pay the landlord. So you still have to scramble for that money. But thus far they have been paying, and they've been persuadable, and they understand we're trying to fix the house as fast as we can. They also understand that the reason we need this is that they were the ones delaying us for so many months. And so that's where we are. But yeah, we still have it.
It's pretty good. I don't mind that. So a couple of things. I'm really glad that, there's only a few stories that I've heard over my 8.5 years of people who have changed their insurance policies right before the fires. And so I'm always very happy to hear those.
Yeah.
I know that I upped ours to the cost of what it would cost to replace the home rather than what they assume that the house is worth. And I did that during our 2020 fires. I also note that you probably did not have watch duty on your phone during the event in the very beginning of it. Is that true? Because if you were going to the Cal Fire site.
Right. I have it now, but I did not have it then.
Yeah, just saying. Also Sonoma County. So we love that. Very proud of John Mills and his team. If you could, if you don't mind, I don't want to invade your privacy at all or your children's privacy, but to talk about some of the, there's a beautiful side to disaster, which is when you talk about all of your neighbors, sort of the things that they will do for each other, and that there is a river of human decency and kindness that really runs through disaster. But then we're also, everyone's still dealing with their own personal journey too. And so how have your kids navigated that? You probably talked to Jeff somewhat about this too, because that's one of the concerns that so many people have who've not been through this process.
Well, the baby has been oblivious to what happened, and he's very happy. Our 3-year-old, now 4-year-old, would talk about the fire every single day for several months. And it was the biggest thing that had happened in her life. And even though we, thank goodness, didn't lose anybody, it wasn't that kind of a grieving process, it was still very hard for her to understand. And she would tell everybody every single day, my old school burnt down, my new school didn't burn down. She just said that every single day. And there's this Jewish holiday called Purim where people bring cookies and treats to each other. And so we were in one of our temporary homes, and one of the rabbis from Palisades came to bring cookies to us, and he knocked on the door, and we answered the door, and she came with me to the door, and she said to him, "Are you here to fix our fence?" She said. So it was constantly on her mind. Yeah. And she doesn't think about it so much anymore. I think time has been helpful in that regard. My 9-year-old son, now 10 years old, has really suffered, I think, because all of his friends were in the neighborhood. And now his only connection to them is on the iPad when they all play video games. The challenge there is that we don't really believe in putting kids in front of screens all the time. So we give them an hour or two on the iPad, but we don't want him to be playing well into the night. And some of them are, and it's frustrating for him. And he hasn't yet made new friends in his new school to the same extent. He's a very friendly, outgoing kid. I just think he's also a spontaneous California outside kid. He likes just meeting friends in the park, and he's not able to do that. And he's lost that idyllic setting that we had. My eldest really struggled with some of the practical arrangements at first because we had to change bus stops and run around. And one of her bandmates in her rock and roll band at school lost his entire house. They were very helpful in getting new instruments. We actually got a new electric piano, even though we didn't lose our house. But, the band got instruments replaced, which was great. She dealt with it really well, I think, because she just decided to take a new direction in her life. She still is interested in music, but she's become more interested in religion than she was before. And she's met some new friends. And I think that she has taken a little bit more ownership of her life, which is exciting. So I think there have been different reactions from different kids. And of course, the parents, we're doing the best we can. And I'm very grateful for my wife, who's incredibly brilliant and resilient. It's been a little harder for me. I've had my ups and downs, but I do feel like 2026 is the year where I want to make sure that we are doing things rather than having things done to us. So, So far that's going pretty well.
It's a big part of what we like to talk about when I'm bringing people who've never been to a disaster with us, but they've been through their own. And then I remind them that this horrible thing has just happened to these people, and we are here to do things for them. And we have to say that over and over again, which means that we can't impose ourselves and we can't be attached to whether or not they take our advice. You need to make sure you are infusing people with agency, because it's all stripped away from you in such a really tough moment. So I want to make sure that I ask you, what would you want people to know who are listening to this podcast? What's really important for you to convey so that they know, how to disaster, because only people who've sort of been through it have certain types of advice. What would you say?
Well, I think that, and this is just a little bit of politics, and we should probably spend more time on politics, but I had never met my city council member before the fire. And a few days into the fire, I was able to get into the fire zone with my media pass. And so I took a few people with me to see their home. And while we were there, I met my city council member, Tracy Park. And I said to her, I know that you've voted some ways that I haven't agreed with in the past, but you're here. And that means so much to me, I said to her. And I said, as long as you're doing this and you're helping us, we'll support you no matter what the other issues are. And I think that being present is so important. And Mayor Karen Bass was absent during the fire, and that has haunted her politically. And it's also provoked a lot of anger and an opponent in the next election. I do think she's making an effort to show up. And that's not to say I agree with her. I mean, I was open about my own frustration with her. But I think being present is really important. I think that's what people expect of leaders. Accountability is important, but being present and just being part of the rebuilding effort. And, again, here comes the Republican-Democrat thing. Lee Zeldin is the head of the EPA. Mm-hmm. I've known him for years through Republican circles. Now, Trump put him in charge, essentially, of the federal response. And it turns out he had a pretty good relationship with Karen Bass, Mayor Bass, when they were in Congress. She's running for re-election, and she has every incentive to work with him. And whatever I might want in my ideal political setup doesn't matter. The fact is, there's now a positive working relationship, or at least there seems to be. And that's because I think she decided to be present in the problem. And maybe she had political motives for doing so, and that's fine. That's how the system is supposed to work. We're supposed to line up the political motives with the public interest. And it bizarrely seems to be happening, maybe a little bit late, but it is happening.
I think that leaders should show up and take it until people are done giving it. Do you know, like that we've seen what works over and over. Like I've worked in 20 counties across 4 states over 8.5 years. And the one thing I'm sure of is that if leaders show up again and again and again and just accept it and go, yes, I know, I hear you. I'm also learning, and I'm going to walk through this with you. And just really consistent FaceTime that people can get through their upset so that they can then work together, because you can't actually recover without local government. It's really the federal government and the local government. The state government has a role, but they're really not primary in the way that people think they are. It's really down to the local governments, and LA is complicated. Like you have a lot of jurisdictions there. But really in the city, which the Palisades is located within the city limits, at least 90% of it is, having that face-to-face, those conversations. I was really glad that Lee Zeldin had that relationship with Karen Bass, and I hope that bears fruit. Also, as head of the EPA, he should also be hearing you about the replacement of contaminated soil issue.
Yeah. Because
that is he's got he's got a job, and brownfields are one way to do it too. Like there is a way to do these things. And so I would hope that you guys are having those conversations too. I know you have to go pick up your kids, and I know we were a little delayed today. And so it's really, I'm never, ever not amazed and gratified how we can transcend politics and the things that we define as dividers between us to get to the other side of it in order to care for each other as we move through this really era of mega fires, which in multiple perils too. Like you're seeing Maui and a lot of Hawaii right now suffer from 2 Kona low storms, which is terrible.
Yeah.
Just as they were getting on their feet. And I think that as we move through this age, I don't care if you believe in climate change or not, like it believes in you. And if nothing else, it's changing. And so since it's changing, we all have to figure out how to help each other. And I don't think the politics of that matter at all. I walk through so many communities where people vote in all different kinds of ways. And the thing that I'm sure of is we can get through it if we do it together every single time. And I think that you and I and our very warm relationship is a good testimony to the fact that is simply true, and that we can meet each other as human beings on the ground. So I appreciate that about you.
And you as well. Thanks for everything you've done.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you again. This has been Joel Pollak, and he is a Palisades Fire survivor and also opinion editor at the California Post. You can catch his podcast called 3 Homeless Guys on any of the platforms, and I encourage you to listen to that as well. And we can have a follow-up episode where we do nothing but politics if you would like.
Sounds good.